in this space where so many college graduate speakers talk about follow your passion, this is kind of an analytical approach, and it can seem a bit clinical. We are always focused on making conscious, educated, intentional decisions. It's not a judgment of a career choice. It's just saying, open your eyes before you make the career choice. Make sure it makes sense. So there's a lot of trade-offs involved, and just making trade-offs in awareness of the potential future debt you might carry or the total cost involved. So stick with us through this. I think it's really important to better financial outcomes long-term. So today we're going to discuss the topic of education choices, analyzing costs and benefits, budgeting, funding and paying off student loans. And Paul is going to kick us off.
Thanks, Alden.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first topic we're going to cover is education choices and benefits. So before we get into all the choices and benefits in detail, it's important to first take the perspective that education and learning is a lifelong pursuit. So to have this perspective, it puts you in a position of humility and always wanting to grow and improve. So once you have that mindset, you can view education options as worthy pursuits and tasks to enjoy as part of your life's journey. In addition to having the mindset, it's also required to stay and keep ahead of competition for jobs and doing well in whatever industry you pursue. So as a result of that, income and happiness should follow, but it's a constant in life to want to sharpen your skills and learn every day. It's part of the human condition. I'm curious, do people here have an internal drive to want to learn more every day and keep up with the advancements of their industry of work or just in general?
I do. Every day. Read.
Yeah, something my grandfather told me when I was young is he said he tries to learn at least one thing every day. And I didn't understand it as a child, but I respect that now. Podcast addiction is becoming a thing.
It's easy. It's easy to get addicted to podcasts. You find one or two that you really like, and they say they have a guest on that hosts a podcast. You got to check that podcast out. And then there's another one. Pretty soon it's 12 hours a day of podcasts. Got to be careful.
Thanks for sharing, Jennifer. And Koala, I'm going to guess you listen at 2x. Is that right? 1.5. Okay.
Slouch. So the educational journey requires, lots of different moving pieces. You got to think about what you like to do, got to think about what you're good at doing. Then you got to think about, careers that combine those things and what are the skill sets necessary you're going to have to develop to enter those careers. And then finally, when you think about going to school, you got to think about, what are the jobs that can come out of that? What are the additional skill sets required for those jobs? And what are the income potentials if you're going to go to school and borrow money to pay for it? What's the income potential to enable you to pay those loans back? Admittedly, most people don't do this. I didn't think about it before I racked up about $45,000 in student loan debt studying Tibetan Buddhism, after which there's not, a massive job market for. It's interesting because my daughter is 13 years old. And I think for the last 3 or 4 years, she's been very clear about what she wants to do. She wants to be a pediatric doctor for as long as I can remember. She's always loved kids. She loves babysitting, loves taking care of kids. She's never been afraid of shots. She's never been afraid of needles. She's always loved going to the doctor. And it just kind of all lines up for her. So it starts with this, what is your dream job, career, or business? Annie knows hers. I kind of, thought it through a couple times, just did a few restarts. But what do you love to do? What's really interesting to you? When you find something you love, you dig in, you read books about it. You look for biographies of people in the industry and stories about the industry. Yeah, I'm getting there. I've got a pretty good idea what I want to do now. I think I found my space. I really love this. It took a while to combine the two things I love the best. And that's, if I was Alexi Lawless, I'd be all over that, Koala. So you got to think through the day-to-day life of someone who does what you want to do, maybe even talk to some of them. So I know that Paul happened to do an informational interview with me like 5 years. How long ago was it?
8 years ago, maybe?
8 years ago. And we weren't hiring at the time. We were very small and we didn't really have space for new folks. And he went on and, maybe it was my interview that did it. Maybe it was others. I don't know. The combination, it was like, this is a great industry. I'm going to enter this industry. but he did that, and many years later, he ends up working here, and it's fantastic. I think it's great. He thought through. It's good to hear. He thought through the whole process, what he wanted to do, and he did it. So then you go and you look at some job postings and descriptions for the field you're interested in. Review some ads for those jobs and those things that are close to those jobs. What are the education and skills for each thing? There's Monster, Glassdoor, Indeed. There's a bunch of places you can go to find information for these ads and the stuff you want to pursue.
Okay, so I'm going to take this on. And this is kind of like what Jonathan was speaking to earlier about how this is maybe a little bit more analytical than what you typically hear. So, as much money and income can be a taboo subject in our society or culture, it's important to know before you pursue a career path what your expected earnings may be. And we don't typically talk about that, but it's important because if you want a certain lifestyle or that you want to support or have a personal goal you want to know, you want to know what you're pursuing will provide that. So there are sites out there that provide this information. You can see some listed on here. And once you have an idea, you want to look at the cost of schooling and education to see if it makes sense for your financial situation. In addition to the schooling you go through, there may be other skills or experiences that may be useful that you may not necessarily receive in schooling. And this can be learned, in other ways, such as hands-on experience or mentorship. So here's another, participation part if you want to share. Has anybody had experience with their job or career or just life experience that they weren't taught in school that they found super valuable in either their career or just in something applicable to life? For myself, the things they didn't teach me, I did a career change and shift, becoming a financial planner, and the things they don't teach you is kind of like the lay of the land of the industry and kind of the philosophies and how do you then want to be an advisor yourself and how you want to communicate, like how Jonathan said, or there's so much more to it that they don't teach you, and you have to just learn on the fly and figure out your own identity around it. And so that's just an example for me that it's an ever evolving process, and I'm still trying to learn every day.
So any pursuit of higher education should be evaluated as an investment. In other words, you invest money to attain an education in expectation of a return on investment in the form of increased income and better employment opportunities after graduation. College is always way more than that. But if you're not going to get a return on the education financially, you have to ask the question of it, does it make a lot of sense? Is it just a passion project? Is that worth debt? And that's kind of the big question here. So this topic demonstrates how to evaluate the higher education decision using common tools that investors like us do, like return on investment and a break-even analysis. So the first formal education course I built was an 8-hour live course at Graduate Theological Union where I was a student. I think I did it in 2007 or 2008. I'm not sure which. So when I was there, the topic of student loans came up, and this kid came up to me, he was getting a PhD in anthropology with a specialization in Byzantine pottery. And he came up to me after a presentation or during a break, and he said, he was surprised there's no jobs for that. And he wasn't sure how he was going to pay off his $120,000 in student loan debt that he got to get his, to get up to that, to get his PhD. Now, I'm certain that the program was amazing and the studies were fun, but someone somewhere along the way should perhaps have suggested that maybe look at the ROI before you begin this program, because there isn't a job for that necessarily. Now there's all kinds of tools and digital things, and you can have a blog and find your tribe and all that kind of stuff. Could be a fantastic writer, absolutely. But even a fantastic writing career, if you know what writing careers pay, unless you're writing bestseller books, not a lot there. And it's $120,000 of debt was a lot of debt. And he was worried, and I didn't have anything I could counsel him on. So ROI, return on investment, it's a performance measure that investors use to compare investment options and measure potential return. So ROI bases the amount you stand to benefit on an investment against its cost. For instance, if you invest $100 and it goes to $150, $50 is your gain. 50 divided by 100 is 50%. Your ROI is 50%. Now, to calculate ROI from schooling options, we look at the total cost of education, how it's going to affect your future income as compared to current future income trajectory without getting further education. So the idea is what would I have made? What can I make? What will it cost me to make that difference? And then what is my ROI on that? So if you want to grab a quick pen, you can write this down. It's not perfect, but if without an education in your lifetime, you could expect $1.5 million, say over 45 years, that comes to $33,000 a year, by the way. And with an education, you can expect 3 million, so that's $66,000 a year. Then the difference is 1.5 million. You know, that's, and the cost of education is 150,000. That's a 10x return. So it's worth spending 150 grand on an education that doubles your income over your lifetime. I mean, that should make some sense. So on the right, we see another version of this analysis. It's a break-even analysis. And I think Paul's going to go into this a little bit later. It's another simple way to compare total cost of education with the annual difference in expected pay to determine how many years it takes you working at the higher salary to pay for that education. Just another way to look at that balance.
Yeah, so when you pursue higher education, it's important to see it as an investment, kind of like Jonathan was saying. So there's an initial cost that may seem like a lot or even insurmountable, but with the right planning and hard work, you can earn more to pay off that debt and then provide the life that you want, as well as pursue your goals and dreams. So another participation question. So has anyone here spent a lot on education to see a good return on their investment? Follow your talent rather than your passion. That's a good point. Like, I think, so for me with my career change, I think I knew how to skill at being analytical and good with numbers, but also like having compassion and wanting to help people. And in the previous profession wasn't including the analytical part as much, which was my talent. And then I also had a passion when I help people. So I found luckily for me, I found a balance of those two things, but I wasn't necessarily following my talent before. And so I had to go take night classes to get my certification in financial planning and also pay for that. And so for me, there was an investment up front. And I can't remember, I don't think I took time off for work. So I was lucky in that regard. So it didn't impact that, but I did eventually make more money. And so I recouped the cost of that investment. And now I'm also just happier. You know, I think what's important about this kind of stuff is sometimes you don't get the immediate return, but it's like it leads you to the place that you do end up getting the return monetarily, but then you also get the happiness return. Yeah, so Jonathan is mentioning break-even analysis. So break-even analysis, and you kind of already mentioned this, but it's determining how long it'll take you to pay off your debt for education expenses with the additional income you expect to earn from this education. So this may help you determine, you know, from the income and numbers perspective, if an investment is, you know, in education is worth it. And so we're going to look at an example in just a moment here. All right, so here's an example of, you know, break-even analysis. So on the left side here, you can see the cost, you know, to go back to score, $60,000. But then there's some other costs, you know, so there's interest that accrues. And let's say you take off time from work, you know, there's also that forgone income. So let's just pretend, or for this example, that's another additional $40,000. So you have $100,000 of expense that you need to recoup. And so now on the right-hand side here, you can see what the income is before the investment in education, and the expectation is that you earn another additional $20,000. So in order to recoup the $100,000 that you spent or lost from foregoing education, is going to take you 5 years to recoup, and that's the break-even point for the break-even analysis of investing in your education.
So obviously your output is only as good as your inputs. So you really got to know what that earning potential might be, both before and after an education. So you really need to know what your total personal education costs, you know, less grant and scholarships that reduce those costs might be. So I'm kind of curious, does anyone here have any strange college expenses that they want to put into the chat? And while you're thinking about it, I bought and sold all-wheel drive Subarus through college. I think I owned 16 different cars in 4 years of college. Like my second year of doing it, I got a letter from the state of Montana explaining to me sales tax on vehicle purchases and sales that I was not doing the paperwork for. So I had like $1,000 bill along with a student bill that kind of surprised me at one point. But still, we figured it out and how to pay with that on that. So that's my strangest college expense was a massive car sales tax bill. Bowling equipment addiction. That's weird. I don't think you can put online poker and investment capital in the same sentence though. I don't know about that. I love it. I hope you kind of get this from what we've just been saying, but your education is an investment. And like any investment, it has costs and benefits. Not all those costs or benefits are financial. There's an opportunity cost, 4 or 5 years of not earning money, albeit at a lower rate. That still is a cost. And there are definite benefits. You learn how to think, critical thinking skills, questioning skills, communication skills. You become more independent. You develop social grit. You develop compassion in college. I don't know what all you guys ran into, but I ran into some situations that require some serious compassion. You learn how to teach while you're learning. There's all kinds of non-financial. Yes, that was part of it. That's definitely the compassion. All kinds of non-financial benefits, and you have to weigh all of these costs and benefits, and ultimately make sure it moves you closer to your long-term goals.
So our next topic is going to be education budgeting. So the items we need to budget for with education expenses are the initial expenses, the in-school expenses, and the post-education expenses. So just to give you a glimpse or preview of what these may be so initial expenses might be registration and application fees and test prep fees, before you apply. The in-school expenses will be tuition, books, supplies, possible room and board. Post-education expenses will be like the interest on your loans or the expense to move somewhere and for your new job. And so we'll go into more detail about these in a moment. So why budget in the first place? First off, it gets you in a good habit and practice of money management and thinking about what you spend and why. So when it comes to education, it begins the practice of thinking about investing in yourself potentially for the first time in your life. So as mentioned earlier, you begin to assess if the cost of education is worth the income you expect to receive, along with the better quality of life. This allows you to make the best choice of school and program for what you want to accomplish with your life. As a result, you are more efficient with your spending, and with hard work, you can get to where you want to go.
Yeah, so you're going to face some initial expenses as you prepare to attend school. This is kind of a list of those. Some fees are unavoidable, cost to attain some transcripts, and depends on the school, but admissions counseling, service some of the universities provide that are complimentary, but there's just a list of things you can expect. And then you got to plan the in-school budget by estimating that income and expenses while you're getting the higher education. So you can conduct research, talk to counselors to do this estimations. Now, does anyone remember the in-school expenses? Do you remember what you paid? This is like an inflation question. You remember what food cost your first year of college? I think I had a semester's meal plan for $150. I think that's right, actually. I tried to figure it out, but yeah, dorm dining, crazy. But I also know, semester, $150 for the whole semester. And I think, I'm sure it's probably subsidized by tuition or something like that. I don't know. But do you remember what you paid for an apartment? Oh yeah, got my money's worth. You know that. 5 squares, man, 5 squares a day. Freshman 20, here we go. So I paid, I think I paid, again, this is just all dredging my memory. I think I paid $300 for our apartment. And I remember one winter, and we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't, that was a lot of money actually, but my roommate invited a guy who lived in the park to live with us over winter, because I went to school in Montana. I think mine was $300 actually. I think that's about right. So I lived the winter in Montana was cold as hell. And we asked this guy, my roommate asked this guy, hey, why don't you come live with us? And he came in, lived with us, and he slept on the couch, but he had food stamps. So for one winter, he was warm and we all ate so well because we had steaks, we took our budget and added food stamps to it. It was pretty incredible how well we ate. And then I worked at restaurants, so I got to eat at restaurants. That was free. Anything we do to cut prices. But I just remember those in-school expenses. They seemed pretty steep then, but looking back, you're just like, wow, I lived in a place that cost $300 a month and I paid $150 a quarter or a semester for a meal plan. It's crazy. So you create this a budget plan, right, that estimates income and expenses when you graduate. And many students don't do this. And as a result, they end up defaulting on student loan payments. Now, when you're estimating your income, you have to think about the degree you expect to earn. You think about how much housing options are going to cost. You got to think about, new clothes for the new career. You got to think about potential payments on your student loans. Also want to think about life events, like changes in your expenses. Maybe you at some point want to start a family. Maybe you want to buy a house, travel, these kinds of things. I realize it's no pre-college student thinks about all these kinds of things when they're thinking about how much money they want to take out in student loan debt, but these end up being the cost by overdoing your student loan debt. You can't do these things then. And critically, this is something that we always basically preach about. Your biggest raise you're ever going to get in your life is when you go from college to working. Because if you're, that jump from, getting a degree to working on the area of specialty that you got, expertise in for that degree, it's the biggest jump in income you're ever going to get. And that's a great time, that big jump in income, to start saving and investing for the future as well. I always say that that's your older self is going to thank you.
Yeah, and I just mentioned in the chat that it's an exciting time because it's like, wow, I have all this money that I never dreamed of having. So when it comes to spending for education, attempt to minimize expenses as much as possible, unless you're getting great value. But you want to keep in mind that prestige doesn't necessarily mean better education. It definitely, helps in terms of just, on your resume, but it doesn't necessarily mean the best education. You also want to make sure that you know what you're paying for and what you'll get a good return on your education investment. So visit schools and programs, do your research, some great websites out there to kind of get to know this stuff and talk to people. And then also remember that high cost, and this goes with anything, but high cost doesn't necessarily mean high quality. So that's a bias we sometimes hold. And when you invest in yourself, if you don't put in the work, you're only hurting the investment in yourself. So do your best to graduate on time, or even sooner if you prefer. If you do try to graduate sooner in order to minimize expenses, you can attend summer sessions, take on more classes per semester, or do online courses. So I know we're speaking from, like, as Jonathan said, like an analytical perspective, and sometimes people want to enjoy this time, because I think even for myself, looking back, I wish I wasn't as serious and diligent, but I think from just a pure analytical financial investment perspective, I think this is a way you want to think about it. And then lastly, when it comes to minimizing expenses with education, you want to reduce your living expenses as much as possible during this time, whether it's having a roommate that has food stamps or something else. Like, not saying it's the best health choice, and like this is a reason why it's a stereotype of college, but this is why people eat a lot of ramen, during that time too, right? So I think they try to reduce their expenses. Other ways are you can get scholarships, you can buy, used books or rent them, or getting in a roommate situation where you can split the costs. I'm curious, and this is another question for the chat, what are some ways that you did, that people did to reduce expenses when you were pursuing your education, whether it was, college or part-time school or whatever it was you pursued? Yeah, no carbon. I always had a job too, so I think that's what I would say. Is I tried to not spend, and I always had a job.
I worked at restaurants. I ate so many meals at the restaurants where I worked. It was just like I would take an extra shift, not for the shift, but for the meal. So there's a lot of options and opportunities exist for helping people to fund a college education. So we're going to cover a few of those here, and always encourage folks to obtain more information about eligibility to receive higher education funding. Creating the solid college funding plan always includes strategies for repaying that debt that you're going to ultimately accrue while you're there. higher education can be a fantastic investment if you've got a clear plan to avoid, minimize, and or pay off the student loan debts. So the middle ones here are the student loan debts. All these other stuff on the outside are things you can use to pay that don't end up leaving you hurt at the end of the game. So for many graduates, getting an advanced education gives them the head start, but for others, it's the very beginning of debt problems. So planning to fund the education can help you avoid the actual debt traps. Planning can help you avoid the debt traps and the issues that take you off the path towards reaching those lifetime goals. So what's missing from this? How do we fund a college decision or a college education? What's missing here? There's one thing that's just, I did this and I'm like, haha. I guess there's two things that are obviously missing. That's a great one. Of course, parents. I can tell we were raised differently. I was thinking work, actually. Work is not on here. Oh, it is employment income. It's there. It's right here. Go ahead, Paul. You're up. Rich uncle. I didn't have one of those. There you go. GI Bill. We'll talk about that in a sec.
Yeah, so scholarships are a great source of money to pay for education expenses. They're typically based on merit because schools want to attract students with good grades and good track record. And unlike loans, scholarships are awards of money that you do not have to pay back. There are millions of dollars in scholarships that go unclaimed each year and can significantly reduce the amount you have to borrow. So you always want to.
Paul, you got to look at the chat, man.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The chat says online gambling profits. Yep, that's not a scholarship.
I think you did that, right, Paul? Isn't that one of the ways you did it?
Yeah. It was more. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
We'll leave it there. Shh.
So unlike scholarships, grants are usually awarded based on need. However, similar to scholarships, you do not need to repay grants. The federal government is the largest grant source, and you can see a list of some of them here. So by completing a FAFSA or a free application for federal student aid, which we'll get into a little bit later, you'll be eligible for different grants. So another method to receive money while getting your education is working. So if you're going back to school, some employers will pay for your education. If you're going to school full-time, then you can do a work-study program or work off campus and start getting skills and experience. When I was in school, I worked for the campus mail and got to drive a mail truck around delivering mail. It wasn't the most glamorous thing, but it provided extra money and helped me stay disciplined. I know, Jonathan, you mentioned working 40 hours a week. Did anybody else work? And I see, Jennifer, you mentioned that too. Did anybody else work during school or have an employer pay for them to go back to school? I think everybody on this call did, probably. Yeah. What I found for me is that I did better in school it's kind of like this snowball effect. Like if you don't work, there's you have more free time and you're like, I'm gonna just procrastinate and mess around, right? So I think when you work, it keeps you more focused, at least for me.
So this is really tiny, and maybe it's tinier on my screen than it is your screen. So the vast majority of student loans, like 80%, are offered by the federal government and processed through the William D. Ford Federal Direct Loan Program, administrated by the Department of Education. So this program includes direct subsidized, direct unsubsidized, direct plus, and direct consolidation loans. So direct plus loans, they used to be called, these are the parent loans for undergraduate students, plus loans. So these were established so parents could borrow to pay for children's education. Grad plus loans are also available. So money for the Stafford loans comes from the federal government through a program called the Federal Direct Student Loan Program, FDSLP. Stafford loans are available in subsidized and unsubsidized versions. So if you're gonna, the idea was you want the subsidized ones, and if you got the unsubsidized ones, you may or may not take them. But if you got subsidized, you always took them. At least that's what I was taught when I was going through. Subsidization is offered by financial hardship. So you or your parents had to have an income below a certain level to get those. So subsidized loans provide money to students based on need, like we just said. They give students a break on interest and give them better payment terms So interest may not start to accrue until after you graduate. In some cases, the government actually pay the interest while you're in school. And so you might, if you've got to get a loan for school, this is the best kind of loan to get. Unsubsidized works a little differently. You're responsible for paying them off with all the interest, and the interest begins to accrue as soon as you take out the loan. If you don't have to pay it, but it's accruing so the debt is actually growing. You're actually making payments, but you're making payments in higher debt levels. So all students are basically eligible for this type of loan, but people have to be careful, when they take them out.
So for private loans, these are the ones with banks, credit unions, and private lenders. So this is the 20% or the non-80% that John was talking about. And they're the less favorable ones because interest typically accrues when the loan begins, and you may need to make payments sooner before you finish school. The interest rate may be fixed or variable. And there also may be more limited options on the deferment or forbearance of the loan itself. It is also important to know that there are limits on the amount of student loans you can take out from the government. So this is based on what year in school you're in and your dependency status for tax filing. These limits are on a per year basis and aggregate basis. So for undergraduate, the max is $12,500 annually. And it's actually, it might be less depending on those factors I mentioned. And then total, it's $57,500. For graduate school, it's $20,500 annually and $138,500 total. So I talked about this earlier, but the free application for federal student aid, or better known as FAFSA, it's one of the most important things to remember when you're thinking of paying for education expenses. So you want to make sure to complete this every year you apply for financial aid with the correct information of your financial circumstances. And the website has actually changed. It's now studentaid.gov, but if you go to the fafsa.ed.gov, it'll redirect you there. And the deadline's vary state to state. So just make sure you're aware of when that is and you file in a timely manner.
So unfortunately, you are required to pay your student loans back, regardless of whether or not you complete your degree, regardless of whether or not you find a job related to the course of study, regardless of whether or not you like your education. You end up having to pay these loans back. But there are circumstances that qualify for loan forgiveness, cancellation, or discharge. You can see some of them here: ROTC, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, volunteers in service to America. Some teaching, dental work, medical work get you there, get you some cancellation or partial cancellation or debt repayment. So has anyone used any of these methods or another method that you didn't have to pay it back? I have a really close friend whose wife went all the way through law school. She had like $120,000 of student loan debt, and she never ever worked. And she basically let those debts pile up. She basically traded stuff on eBay. She did other things where it was all sort of under the table work. So she never reported income for 20 years after she got her law degree. And I've never heard of this. This is the only instance I've ever heard of this. But Sally Mae wrote her loans off. They ultimately gave up trying to collect from her, which shocked me when I was told that happens. But that's the only time I've ever heard of it. I wouldn't recommend that as a path because I know how she lived most of the time was pretty minimally. And they kept their finances totally separate so that he wouldn't be impinged on for that, have to owe money on that. But so in that note, Paul asked this question about legislation with loan forgiveness. I don't know if it happens, and I think there's arguments for and against it. I just think there's stuff that's happened in the past that led us to where we are now. And I think that we'll deal with some of that. I think Biden will deal with some of that. But I think that if you have $120,000 of student loan debt, it's not gonna, if you get 20,000 or 30,000 forgiven, you still have a problem. So that I think the thing we can do that's even better is educate students, make sure people know when they're going into this game, what they can expect, how it works, and maybe start in, I don't know, 3rd grade with some financial literacy. It's unfortunate we don't do that. There are also small tax credits. We're talking $2,000, $2,500 a year available to students while they're students, but this is actually pretty limited. It's immediate family, it's specific institutional accreditation, among some other pretty basic limits that minimize how much of this actually happens.
And then there's also some niche programs you can be part of. So, we were talking about this earlier. So if you're a veteran, you can see about the GI Bill, and you must complete a benefits certification form. And then there's also a Violence Against Women Act program that can help. So in summary, you want to make sure that you review all your options for education and funding sources. You can get grants, scholarships, which you don't have to pay back. And then of course you want to look into student loans. Make sure you understand the loans you're getting into and the details. And when all is said and done with your education, you want to make sure you have a repayment plan for your loans.
So cost is an issue. It's very difficult for most people to go to college without incurring some kind of debt. So once you've taken out the debt, at some point in the future, the repayment plan has to begin. So once you've decided to go to college, you've attempted to get as much money as you can to pay for school by, working, saving, getting grants, talking to mom and dad, et cetera. But you still take out student loan debt to make these ends meet. So let's talk about some strategies for paying down the loans effectively and methods to minimize the amount of money you have to pay back. Now, first, if you have defaults, you got to get them cleared up. And when you run into challenges, you can't hide. You got to go to the lenders. You got to talk to them. You got to discuss deferral, forbearance options. You got to figure out a way and just be open and honest about it, because they can just clamp down on your credit, and they can just clamp down on you. And so it's best if you're just like, you know what, hardship, difficulty, can't make the payments, live in the wrong part of the country, whatever, lost the job. Just this is the reality. Be honest about it.
Yeah, there's several factors in terms you want to know about your student loans. So you want to know how long the grace period is, which is the time before your payments are due, what your balance is, the interest rate, repayment terms, how much your monthly payment is, what triggers a repayment, and if there are any tax benefits, such as interest deductions on the loan. So the best strategy you can have when it comes to paying student loans off is to pay the maximum you can towards the highest interest loans first, and then the next highest. You continue to do this until they're all paid off, and then that can save you a lot in interest. If you have good interest rates on the loans, then this may complicate the strategy, because then you might want to pay off slower. But this strategy assumes you want to pay off the loans as soon as possible. I think, do you know what student loan interest rates are going for, Jonathan, or anybody else? I think I saw like 5 or 6%, but I could be wrong.
I know that some banks use this as sort of a loss leader. So First Republic uses student loan consolidation as a loss leader, and high credit, you can get 1.9. I think it's 1.9 at a place like First Republic.
Wow.
But I think it's 4 or 5% otherwise. Okay. Which to me is, if you're going to subsidize, if you want to support people with student loans, the easiest thing to do is cut their rates. It's all guaranteed by the federal government anyways. Why does the intermediary need 4 or 5%? It makes no sense to me. Like, that's the easiest thing to do is to make student loans widely available and really, really cheap. But I think, some of the reasons is what are the consequence of doing that, suddenly education will be lots more expensive because people have access to more credit. It's an interesting dynamic,
Plus, there's no credit history on younger people, right? So then there's more risk, or you just don't know the risk, right? So.
Right.
So on the other side of things, if you're having trouble making payments, you have some options. So you can explore if you can defer or forbear the loan. You may also be able to change the payment date or how you pay, perhaps based on the amount of income you earn. You can also consolidate your loans or go through a student loan rehabilitation program if you default on the payments. But just be aware that if you miss payments or default on the loan, the penalties can be pretty severe. So has anyone here had a student loan that they had to change the repayment plan or negotiate with the lender the repayment date? I know we talked about forbearing or pushing off, but what about the?
Oh, yeah, I did forbearance and deferment. I was a professional at that.
Income-based repayment. Yeah, that's a very popular one that people do.
All right, you got to know the repayment triggers. Oh, yeah. And you got to read the terms and conditions of any loan to understand what they might when those loans might become due. So some triggers are, see them listed here. You graduate, loan is going to come due. We're going to have to start making payments. You withdraw from school, loan is going to come due. You drop to less than half time, or I've seen a third time, loan comes due. You change, and this is something to be careful of. In some loans, if you change your address, you change your contact information, the loan can come due. You transfer to another school, loan can come due, depending on what the source of the loan was. So there's just lots of different things that can trigger loan repayment times. So deferment, we've touched on it, is basically an approved delay of your repayment schedule. Usually it's a one-time agreement, but if you face hardship, short-term unemployment, what have you, you may be able to extend the deferment even further. Forbearance is a little like deferment. Typically, forbearance either reduces your monthly repayments or stops your loan repayments requirements for up to 12 months. There are two types of forbearance: discretionary, it's usually tied to a hardship or illness, and then mandatory. These are something that's legislated if you meet certain criteria. So I know when I first entered this industry, this was with I lived in where did I live? I lived in Emeryville, worked in San Francisco, made $18,000 a year my first year in this business, had $45,000 of debt. I deferred and forbeared for whatever I could transfer, I could switch, whatever. And I didn't pay a loan payment for like 5 years. And so by the time I was done, my 45 was probably 55. And finally I moved from one organization to another. I got a signing bonus and I just wiped it away. And I was just like, I can't, I couldn't manage it. So had a great opportunity and took it and paid them off, which was huge, like life-changing to get that off of you for sure.
Do you remember the interest rates back then?
I think mine were 6.
That's not bad.
No, not bad.
Cool.
Actually, it's interesting because I think the prevailing rates were higher, but the relative, the student loan rates relative to the prevailing rates were lower. Today, student loan rates are higher than prevailing rates,
Yeah.
which is why I don't get that. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that is backwards. So you can qualify for discretionary or mandatory forbearance. Discretionary can be for illness, like Johnson said, or financial hardship. And you may also qualify for a partial repayment if not granted a full forbearance. For mandatory forbearance, you must meet certain eligibility requirements that you can see on this slide. In order to request deferment or forbearance, you can do so through your school's financial aid office. For other types of loans, such as direct loans or FFEL loans or programs, you'll want to contact your loan servicer. It's important that you keep your contact information up to date.
So there's 3 ways basically to recover from default. One of them is to somehow find the money and suddenly all of a sudden pay it in full, the way I did. And then another way is to contact the loan officer, work out affordable payment plan, and then after a series of on-time payments, the loan will come out of default. So if you have defaulted, there's a few things you can do. The final thing is the loan consolidation and reorganize your loan. It's kind of like a refinance. And you can actually do this through many programs, but there's one in the Department of Education where you can kind of go direct. It's basically a simple refinance, and you need to, just like you're refinancing anything, you need to look at the loan terms, interest rate, fees, length of the loan, and any other details that are important that they're telling you. I think that's it. I say thank you very much. We did it just under an hour, but I can answer some questions. We can chat a little bit, whatever you'd like.
What's the chance of free education in the future?
0.
What are places like Stanford though doing?
So yeah, free education does exist. If your income is low enough and you can get into Harvard or Stanford, or I mean, if those 2 things are kind of, they don't usually meet. If you have an income that's really low, you've had a lot of hardship. You haven't had the same tutors and support as the higher income people have. But if your income is low enough, Stanford, you get in for free. You go for free if you get in. If you can get into an Ivy League or a great school, you go for free, for sure.
And I think there's something in the state of California with community colleges as well, right? I don't know if it's a nationwide thing.
Well, community college tuition is like $40 a year. It's so incredibly low.
There's something called Kids Teach Tech, It's it's kids teaching other kids. You might want to just do a Google search on it. A lot of the kids are
Yeah.
local. They'll, they might be doing things virtually these days, but they'd, you know, back when people could get together, businesses would turn over a conference room to them and let them, bring in other kids, and the kids would be teaching adults things. They, they have Raspberry Pis, which are little, you know, a computer on a card basically, and they would teach all kinds of things. But look up Kids Teach Tech.
Cool. Will do.
But Khan Academy would also have things. Yeah, Coursera has some free classes.
Yep. I think I don't remember what I think it might be Yale has a financial planning class that's free, which is it's pretty awesome. I don't think it's not Yale. It could be Duke. I think it might be Duke. It's really, there's awesome stuff on Khan Academy and Coursera that's free.